Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel, Life Odysseys. Another beautiful morning here in eastern Kentucky, up here by the pond. Got to do a few things today. Yeah, excuse the camera shaking. I got to cut this stuff up here, get it chipped up, clean this area up because I'm going to bring some more stuff up from the other part of the property to chip here on this site. Where I'm cutting it at, it's hard. It's too steep. It's hard to get down in there and chip it. And I don't think the chipper needs to be on an angle anyways. So it's just be a much safer place to do it. Let's go up here and see what my co-pilot's doing. Hi, Maggie. You excited, ain't you? You gonna say anything to the people? Look at that beautiful face. That's just a beautiful face right there. Ain't it, Maggie? Is your beautiful face? Yeah. So I don't know how I'm going to act after Dad starts that damn chipper up. But yeah. Yeah. So we'll be back. Today we're going to talk about more of the 1989 season. As I mentioned before about getting started at Daytona. Well, I finally took it upon myself last night to look up the stats for 89. And even though it was a productive year, it wasn't very successful as far as the stats go. But I'll go through briefly how we did during that season. And there's a couple stories that happened during that season that'll probably be in a separate video. So bear with me here. I got my notes. May have to look down at it. I'm not your professional TV guy. I try my best, but we'll get through it. So like I mentioned before, after Atlanta, we got in a wreck early in the race, got squeezed up the wall, and that ended our day. I'm thinking, it says here we started 18th and we finished 36th. So that was my first trip to Atlanta, which if I remember right, you know, as I talk about this stuff, some things come back. You got to realize now, this is like over 30 years ago. So even though I want to believe that it was yesterday, it's not. And I'm going to do a separate video on something like that too, on like, where is the time gone? So like I mentioned before, after Atlanta, we got in a wreck early in the race, got squeezed up the wall, and that ended our day. I'm thinking, it says here we started 18th and we finished 36th. So that was my first trip to Atlanta, which if I remember right, you know, as I talk about this stuff, some things come back. You got to realize now, this is like over 30 years ago. So even though I want to believe that it was yesterday, it's not. And I'm going to do a separate video on something like that too, on like, where is the time gone? It's amazing how fast it goes. So anyways, our first short track of the season that year was at Killcare, which is in Xenia, Ohio, which wasn't very far from our shop. And that's where I started my career the year before, on July 1st of 88. So going back, I had a little bit more of a, you know, what to expect on the track and everything, but still, the results wasn't that great. I mean, they was okay. It says here we started 12th and ended up 7th, which in all reality is pretty good, considering no experience. I mean, like I told you before, just absolutely none, zero experience. So after we went to Killcare, it says here that the next race was at Talladega, which was a pretty good run for us. That would have been the spring race at Talladega. Back then, we ran 2 races at Talladega every year. It says here we started 27th and ended up 9th. So that was you know, we ran Daytona, had some issues at Daytona, still finished the race, gained some experience because you finished the race. And so like Daytona, for instance, I'll never forget Benny Parsons told me, he says, you know, it's important to finish races because Daytona, you only go there once a year. So if you have a bad day or whatever, you got to wait a whole year to go back to Daytona. So yeah, it's important because, you know, you don't want to have to wait a whole year to have to go back if you suffer issues or get in a wreck or whatever. And I don't know how it happens, but I did my best, and I think I did pretty good about staying out of wrecks. You always try to anticipate who you're racing around, what kind of racers they are. You try to keep enough distance for that and kind of anticipate what that other guy's going to do. And the problem with it is there's so much thinking goes on. I always used to say racing Daytona and Talladega, I didn't get physically worn out. I got mentally wore out at those races because of constantly thinking all the time of what's going to happen and so forth. But yeah, we ended up ninth, which, you know, that's a good day for somebody that don't have much experience. So then we go to Flat Rock, Michigan, which some of us in the family called the Level Pebble. My brother Jim, he raced there a lot. Dad's run up there. It says here we qualified 15th and ended up 21st. So, you know, still trying to get the hang of things. I don't know as far as where I stood as far as the patience go, or my dad for that matter, how much patience he had in me. I'm sure he understood. I'm just getting started, so we just got to go get through these rough times, and hopefully better times are ahead of us. Then we go to Pocono, Pennsylvania, which back then too we ran twice a year. But it says here that we started 12th and ended up 30th. If I remember right, we had engine issues. So, and I don't think that was very long into the race. But that was, you know, we had to be careful if we had engine issues. Any kind of small thing, we had to make sure to cut our day short because we don't want to cut our year short. If anything that happens to the motor is not minor, but if you break a valve spring or something, and keep everything from internally messing everything up, then that'll go home, fix it, and get to the next one. And that's just the way it was back in them days. Had to race smart. You had to race to get to the next one. Because like I mentioned before, we ran the same motor all of 1988 and all of 1989 except the last race in Atlanta on one engine. And like I mentioned before, if we'd have had a catastrophic issue, I wouldn't be talking to you about this stuff today, probably. So then it says here we go back to Killcare. Started 20th and ended up 13th. So yeah, we didn't run as good as we did the first time there. But, you know, you live and learn and get the laps in you can and go to the next one. So then it says here we went to Hagerstown, Maryland, which we went to 2 years. I can't remember. I'll look at my stats for 90. But I don't think we went there 2 years. I don't know if it was 88 and 89 or 89 and 90. But it says here we started 17th and ended up 15th. And I think that was a half-mile dirt track. Real tight corners. So, yeah, that was a learning experience too. Running on dirt, at least on a half mile. Then we go back to Pocono. It says here we qualified 19th and ended up 6th. So that was a pretty good day for us, that particular day. Pocono was fairly decent to me. I had pretty good runs there. The races, they wasn't too awful long. But it just seemed like, and it's a long ways around that place. I mean, it's 2.5 miles, but still takes a little while to get around there. But we had a pretty good day. Then we go back to Talladega. So things are starting to click a little bit along here. So we qualified 28th, and we ended up 5th. Talladega was another good place for us. We had some good runs at Talladega. We come awful close to winning a couple races at Talladega. I'll talk about that later. But yeah, we run 5th. It seemed like it was getting the hang of things on the super speedways. And it was a different animal, different animal. Then we go to Delaware Speedway Park. I think that's how you pronounce it. If not, I'm sorry. That's up in Canada. It says here we started 14th, ended up 23rd. And that was one of the particular races that I got the back bumper beat off of me. It took me a few races to understand and realize that if you'll get taken advantage of if you let it happen. And after that race, I finally had enough. I mean, I was going to have to get with the program or get somebody else to drive the stuff, because they was going to try to run all over me. And eventually, when it come time to realize, I was going to have to change my way of going about things, and it just wasn't going to happen anymore. So that was one of the times up there in Delaware that I changed my way of thinking a little bit, and looked at my competitors, some of them anyways, a little differently. And they knew who they know who they are without mentioning their names. So then we go back to Flat Rock. It says here we started 19th and ended up 9th, which, was a pretty average day. Flat Rock is a 1/4 mile, basically a round track. You don't really get up to speed too much. But I remember back then too, you believe it or not, I was running in races without a head or without a neck brace. And after a while, those races, I'm telling you, if it's a long green flag race, your head starts feeling like it weighs a ton, trying to hold it up. So it wasn't long after that I started running a neck brace, a head brace, to help with that issue. And that definitely helped. Then we go to Springfield, Illinois, which is a 1 mile dirt during the Illinois State Fair. And this is the race that I'm going to tell one of these stories in a separate video. Dad came out of retirement and drove Tracy Leslie's car for this race, which was pretty incredible. And what he did that day was pretty incredible. It says here we started 20th, ended up 14th. I think Dad ended up 10th, if I remember right. The dirt was fun. I really enjoyed running on the dirt. You almost got to drive the dirt with a heavy stock car, like on asphalt, to make time. At least that's how Dad told me how to do it. And to watch him do it, he was really fast and didn't look like he was going anywhere. It was kind of weird, but that's the way it was. Then we go to Toledo. Now, Toledo ended up being one of my best tracks, really. Love going to Toledo. My brother Jim had a lot of success at Toledo. Dad won at Toledo. It says here we started 8th and finished 7th, which that was a good day, really. I think Toledo kind of grew on me to where it suited my style. But yeah, that was a good day. Then we go to DuQuoin, which is in southern Illinois at the DuQuoin State Fair. I don't know how that became Illinois having 2 state fairs, but that's the way it is. And it's a mile dirt track. I had a lot of success there too. Never won there, but had some success. And them races back then, a couple of them was pretty long. So you just had to stay out of trouble, Run the whole day and you'll have a good finish. It says here we started 15th and ended up 8th. Then we go to Salem, Indiana, and that was a 500 lapper. And Salem's a half-mile track, something like Bristol. If I remember right, there again, I had to check. I think we ran at least 2 500 lappers there. And I had mentioned before, it took so long to run that race. My back was killing me by the end. I couldn't get out. My back hurt so bad. But it says here, you know, we started 18th and ended up 3rd. So that was my best finish of the year by far. But I think what we had an advantage over a lot of people at those places, but the car was kind of overkill as far as structural, and it just was strong, and it held up to the pressures of a place like Salem, and stuff wouldn't break. A lot of guys would try to make stuff out of the lightest stuff they could, and the stuff would just end up breaking. We had an issue with that later on with a different car that we ran, breaking spindles and stuff. And this stuff just wasn't heavy enough for that stuff, for them tracks with that heavy of a stock car. Then we finish up the season at Atlanta. Which says here we started 13th and ended up 22nd. There again, Atlanta, I don't know. Atlanta, I run good at certain times at Atlanta, and just never really had any luck. Yeah, I got a handful of good finishes I'll talk about later, but Atlanta was kind of tough on me, you know. Plus, that's where I ended up having a pretty bad wreck during the end of the 1994 season when I won my 2nd championship. Had to go to the hospital and all that, but that's a story for another video. But as I wrap up this video, I think, you know, 1989 was a year that I gained a lot of experience, and it was a year that certain times during that year, what made for what was coming after that to be successful in the coming years. There's stories in that year that really contributed to that, and I'll get to that in a later video. So I think that's going to do it for today. If you would, please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take it easy, have a good one, and I'll see you later.